This is the beginning of the end. This is the last stop for my Spanish Ibex slam. I've got the Southeastern, the Ronda, the Gredos a couple days ago. Now here I am in the Beceite area of Spain. Kind of bittersweet because this is the most beautiful spot I've ever seen. My belly is full of ham and coffee. Welcome to Spain.
Well, Nick, how you doing back there?
Previously on Nick's Wild Ride.
Oh yeah, I see him.
I returned to Spain to hunt with my good buddy Antonio Terrell from Ibex Hunting, and I've come all this way to finish my Spanish Ibex slam. Last week I was hunting in the Beceite Mountains for the Beceite Ibex, and after a hard day of hiking, I found success in a big way. I was reminded just how much Spaniards love sausage and ham, and I learned that my guide Javier is a very interesting dude.
You are my new best friend. You make the wine, you make the sausages, and you're a hunter.
Now it's off to Beceite to chase after the Beceite Ibex, and this is the rest of my adventure. My goal whenever I travel to a new place in this crazy world we live in is to discover what makes it tick, to find something special or of some sort of cultural significance. And in the tiny village of Segorbe, Spain, I found something special. I met this guy. Though I never got his name and he didn't speak much English, we connected over what he had in the back of his truck. Olives, lots of them, that he grew and picked himself. He's dropping them off to have them made into olive oil. And as you can imagine, I am definitely interested in how that works. And I wasted no time diving in to help. This is Jose. Jose is the local park ranger and also will be my guide on this hunt. As it turns out, his family has operated this mom and pop olive oil processing plant for generations, and he's graciously offered to show me the ropes. This is the only pair of gloves I've ever put on that already have olive oil inside of them. Spain is the biggest producer of olive oil in the world. It produces around 44% of the world's olive oil each year. It might seem unbelievable, but the number of olive trees in Spain is roughly the same as the total population of the entire United States of America. No, this is not what it looks like. It's not baby food, and it's not poop. Instead, it's lots and lots of mashed up olives. I'm getting to the point where I realize that I'm just in these guys' way. I mean, they do this every day and they go so fast, and nobody wants an American idiot just like, I mean, if I came to your office and screwed your job up, would you like that? No. The olives are first poured into a trap on the street, where they fall into this machine, where they're literally ground and mashed up, pits and all. Ground up olives. Then, when you pull this chain, it sucks out the mashed olives and they're spread across these woven mats. It's warm and goopy, kind of disgusting. They repeat this process dozens of times, stacking one mat on top of another. And because of the weight, the olive oil already begins to separate from the mash. Now that tastes like olive oil. It's good. The Phoenician tribes of what is modern-day Syria are said to have introduced the olive tree to Spain around 1050 BC, meaning that Spain and olives have a connection that is over 3,000 years old. But it was the Romans who began the spread of olive groves throughout the Iberian Peninsula. And later it was the Moors, who were Muslim inhabitants of Spain during the Middle Ages, that introduced more advanced cultivation and production techniques. The family operation that I'm witnessing today carries forward those traditions with techniques that have been around a long time. They're almost done stacking this up. They've got one more left before they take it to the press. And as I've watched them do this, it occurs to me that this is the same way they've been doing this for hundreds, if not thousands of years. We might be in a place with lights and a modern hydraulic press, but it's no different than it was when their ancestors were doing it. Pretty cool. The last step is to move this stack of mush across the slippery, oily floor to the press, where the smashing begins and the oil starts to flow. Then it's cycled through this centrifuge machine, and voila. So you use fresh hot water, and then olive oil here, and the other stuff goes into there. Okay. Right? See? Cool. And then what comes out here is pure olive oil. May I?
Yeah.
That's really good. That's really good. The Beceite Mountains are on the east coast of Spain. They lie halfway between the cities of Barcelona and Valencia, and this is the only region in the world where you can hunt the Beceite Ibex. The Beceite Mountains are a low-lying mountain range with dense vegetation, and the Ibex, which bears its name, is the largest of the 4 Ibex species in Spain in both body weight and horn size. While the hunting season for them goes between November and May, the best time is obviously to hunt during the rut, which is in November and December. It's December 15th, and today we begin hunting for the last Ibex in my Spanish Ibex Grand Slam.
You see this stone wall in front of us?
Yeah.
Just over.
This is the first 5 minutes of our first day in Beceite. We've already got 3 or 4 males, 3 or 4 females, and 2 males here.
Yeah. All guys.
All guys.
All joking aside, what I'm about to do is nothing short of a dream come true. There is nothing like experiencing a place for the first time, and to be doing it with a legendary Ibex guide is amazing. And then to start seeing Ibex in the first 5 minutes, man, I got a feeling this is gonna be a good day. But first, like all good mountain hunts, it's time to start hiking. Then, in the middle of nowhere, we walk up on something that blows my mind. Antonio just told me that this is an old mill, hundreds and hundreds of years old. They use the water from the creek to turn a grinding wheel, I guess. It's crazy to me because we are so far from anywhere here. We're deep, deep, deep in the mountains. Yet people lived out here, shepherds. And they had to create stuff on their own because there's over hundreds of miles from the nearest city. I'm glad it wasn't me. Man has lived and survived in some of the roughest and toughest places in the world. They learned to adjust with what they had, and the lessons that they learned year after year made them survivors. Life was usually far from easy, but they adapted in their search for the 3 things they needed to live: water, shelter, and food. Food, of course, was sometimes hard to come by, and in the toughest and roughest of areas, it usually came down to hunting and fishing. Animals not only gave them meat to eat, but also tools, shelter, and clothing. Nowadays, modern hunters are still connected to our ancestors by the pride that we feel from eating what we kill and feeling the same excitement that they did from the thrill of the hunt. We spotted a giant Ibex like half a mile away just that way, so we're packing up, we're going. After literally running up this mountain, we make it into shooting range of a giant Beceite Ibex. The last Ibex needed to fulfill my Spanish Ibex Slam. I get set up, and I get into a comfortable position to shoot, but there's one small problem.
Yeah, I know. I can't shoot because of the tree. I mean, no, there's no reason for us to move right now. He's fine, right?
One thing that I've learned over my years of hunting all over the place is that rushing somewhere will never get you anywhere. To quote the great Guns N' Roses, all we need is just a little patience, which I don't know how to say in Spanish, but I'm pretty sure that these guys know what I mean.
Into your arms I run.
After all, it's the rut, and this monarch has tons of ladies around. He's not going anywhere.
This killing game of one.
It's just a matter of time until one of those girls lead him to a spot that I have a clear shot.
All I need is to breathe. No time to sleep. It's over now. Oh, it's colder now. Into the harm, I'm done.
And that, my friends, is what you call a swing and a miss. Miss is a 4-letter word, but it's not the 4-letter word that I'm thinking right now.
Game over. Game over. Game
You know the old saying, it ain't over till the fat lady sings, and I haven't heard any singing on this mountain in Beceite, Spain. Now, as I try to make a follow-up shot, I have the same problem I had earlier, a tiny bush that is obscuring my shot.
I got the bush. I got the bush in front of me now.
Before, I didn't want to move and risk spooking the ibex. But after a clean miss, they're all on high alert and ready to bust out. And now, a risk is exactly what I need to take, because if I don't move, I'm in danger of not getting a second shot.
Hey. Whoa. Whoa. Oh my God.
Nick, you can cry if you want. We understand.
Every muscle in my body is shaking. Oh my gosh. I just did it. That's my slam. All 4 Spanish ibex. Woo! Come here. Come here. Antonio, my friend. I would not be here if it weren't for this guy.
Do you know?
This is without a doubt the best outfitter I've ever worked with.
It's a grandfather.
Grandfather?
Yes. It's amazing. I love it. Something you get, you know, this ibex belongs to you. It's your ibex. Great day. Somebody take care of you.
Thank you, brother.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
As I sit down next to this incredible animal, I begin to reflect on what just happened and the journey that has brought me here. 2 years ago, I stepped foot in Spain for the first time, and I first met Antonio. And now here I sit, with my slam complete.
I mean, to think about the fact that I've had the chance to do this. This is literally, you're looking at a guy living his dream. Traveling around the world with people like these guys, making friends, having experiences. 4 ibex in Spain, all of them. I never thought I'd say that.
And honestly, this moment has made me a little emotional.
Unbelievable. I mean, if I seem a little melancholy, it's because I am. I'm taking stock of this whole moment, this whole place. I got 3 words. I love Spain. Viva España!
The next day, back in the ancient city of Segorbe, Antonio shows once again why Iber Hunting is one of the best outfitters in the world. For them, a hunting trip is about a lot more than hunting.
It's lunchtime, and Antonio has set up a traditional Spanish lunch for us, including a local thing that we're going to see in a second. But I want to point out that we've already eaten enough food for 2 lunches. And there's wine, and jamon, and tomatoes, and cheese.
And garlic.
And garlic. How do you do this all the time?
Mounting up, mounting down.
Mountain up, mountain down. Okay.
Antonio is introducing me to a traditional Valencia paella, which is a Spanish rice dish. Besides rice, it's a hodgepodge of all sorts of things, including chicken and rabbit, all sorts of spices, and this one even has snails in it. Oh, and of course, this one has Spanish olive oil for the base. It's one of the most famous of all Spanish dishes, and the most authentic of them all is here in this region of Spain. Just like all of his Iber Hunting clients, Antonio treats me like royalty.
Merry Christmas.
And just when I thought things couldn't get any better, he surprises me with a gift.
This is the second surprise. Congratulations for your Grand Slam Ibex in
Thank
Spain.
you. It says Nick Hoffman, Grand Slam 2019 Spanish Ibex, Iber Hunting. How cool is that? Wow.
To all our hunters who hunt with us the 4 Grand Slam Ibexes, we always give a nice prize and a memory.
It's an honor. Thank you, my friend. Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
Thank you.
So all our hunters
you.
enjoy.
Thank you.
I feel much better now.
Unless you've been living on Mars and you don't like dessert, you've heard of a truffle. I'm talking about the delicious chocolatey ball of awesomeness that I'm 100% sure my wife would choose over me if she was at gunpoint. But I want to tell you about the other kind of truffle, one that some people don't even know exists, one that you can only find in certain parts of the world, and one that has an incredibly high price tag. Now that I'm done hunting in Spain, my guide Antonio takes me to do something special. He's going to take me to hunt for truffles, and not the chocolate kind. And to do this, he introduces me to the experts, Alberto and Ivan. These guys have been hunting truffles their entire lives.
So tell me what we're doing here.
So we are doing now, we want to show you, like these guys pick up the truffles with a dog.
With the dog.
Yeah.
So all these trees here, is this, it's just the one over there?
All these trees.
It's an orchard, basically.
Yeah.
Truffles are the fruiting body of a fungus, a lot like a mushroom. But while a mushroom grows out of the ground, truffles grow at the base of trees, under the ground, which makes them very, very difficult to find. And this is where you enter a hunting dog.
Oh, look at that.
There are all sorts of breeds that are used for truffle hunting, including poodles and Belgian Malinois, spaniels, and beagles. Ivan's dog of choice is a Springer Spaniel, who wastes no time getting to work.
We've only been here 5 minutes, $100. Unbelievable.
Yep, you heard me right. That little truffle we found is worth over $100. Certain kinds of truffles are worth up to $150 per ounce. Why, you ask? Well, it's simple. Fancy food. Truffles are a prized delicacy in all sorts of different kinds of cooking, and their bold and unique taste has made them sought after for centuries. Truffles have been recorded as an important cooking ingredient as early as 20 BC, but back then, they didn't usually use dogs to find the truffles. Instead, they used these. The strength of a pig's nose is legendary, and their ability to find things underground and root them up is second to none. But hunting truffles with domesticated pigs presents two problems. The first is that they have a tendency to dig up large areas of ground, making a huge mess for the landowner. And the second is that they would eat the truffle if you didn't get it from them fast enough. I mean, why would they turn over something they love to eat? Kind of like me with a cold beer, which is something I don't like to share. Anyway, as the centuries went on, truffle hunters figured out that a hunting dog could do the same thing and would happily trade the truffle for a treat. And that's why nowadays you don't see many truffle hunting pigs around.
I love that the dog just lays right down, knows his job. One, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And each one of those is like $100 a piece. It's $1,000 sitting right there. And now Freddie gets a treat. Pretty good system.
They call this truffle hunting, and I can see why. When you watch the dog work and the truffle hunter handling that dog, there's not a whole lot of difference between doing this
It's really strong. I mean, the truffle smell is really strong in the dirt.
and being out hunting birds or squirrels. Only this kind of hunting makes you money.
Seriously, what's better than watching a dog work so happy, doing what he loves to do? And a dude that loves his dog. It's awesome. Nothing better.
I have always been a bit of a dreamer. I dreamt of hunting white-tailed deer when I was a kid. I dreamt then and dream now about traveling the world and meeting new people along the way. I dreamt of accomplishing things that most people figured would never happen, but they did. I dream of learning new things and doing new things and seeing new things through strangers' eyes. And when I measure it by those standards, my time here in Spain has been nothing short of a dream come true.
Unbelievable.
What you might not realize is that an adventure like this is a lot more accessible than you think, and it can start the same way that it started for me. Pick up the phone or email a guy like Antonio and Eber hunting. Every dream come true has to start somewhere, but sometimes action is the hardest part. So let me leave you with a question. What are you doing to make your dreams come true?